Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of The Girls Room. This is the International Women's Month edition of our series of Google Hangouts that we have every month, featuring badass guests from the Muslim community and beyond, talking about the topics that we actually want to talk about. And we couldn't be more excited to have the stellar lineup that we have tonight. These are the media renegades of the Muslim community, that we have such influential women that we get to learn from and are paving the way with the way Muslim women are being represented in the media, the way the narrative is being shaped, and everyone comes from a really diverse background from the industry. So we want this conversation to serve as a resource for young Muslim women who are interested in getting involved with media. We want to delve into the challenges facing Muslim women today and the community as a whole when it comes to mainstream media and the way that we are being represented, and most importantly, how we can combat those challenges moving forward. So we're expecting this to be a very fun and dynamic conversation, and I cannot wait to have it. I personally have been looking up to these women for a long time. So I definitely want to start out with having everyone introduce themselves, like who you are, what organization you work with, what your position is, and then, of course, tell us an interesting fact about yourself that we couldn't find anywhere else.
Okay, I'll start off. So my name is Sana Said, and I am a writer and currently also a producer for AJ Plus, which is the all-digital division of Al Jazeera. And a fact about me that you would probably not find anywhere online, because I solely exist online, probably that, oh my god, there's so many things, but when I was, for Halloween in grade 11, and grade 12 actually, I dressed up in a pair of extremely baggy pants that went down to my knees and an oversized sports jersey while I was wearing hijab as well. And this is back in 2003, 2004, so that was really weird.
That's awesome.
I'll go next. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and good evening. My name is Zainab Chaudhry, and I work with the Council on American Islamic Relations. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, and I serve as the national spokeswoman and also as the Maryland Outreach Manager for CARE. And one interesting fact that you probably won't read about me anywhere is that my socks often don't match. And the reason for that is because I get dressed in a hurry and I don't usually get enough sleep because of my crazy schedule. So I don't really pay too much attention. And then when I'm praying during the day, I realize that my socks often don't match. So, yeah.
Perfect.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hannah Zuberi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, alhamdulillah. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Muslim Matters. I am also a writer for a Muslim newspaper here in the DC area called the Muslim Link. I have been, in my previous life, I helped start the CNBC bureau in Islamabad, Pakistan. That's where my journalism career ended before I had kids. But alhamdulillah, that was quite a while ago. One fact that you probably won't find about me online anywhere is probably I'm an insomniac. Maybe people can figure that out because I'll be tweeting at like 3 o'clock at night. But yeah, that's me.
I think being an insomniac is probably something that we all have in common.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maria Ibrahimji. I am not an insomniac, so I'll start with the fun thing about me that most people don't know, and I guess my immediate family knows. I need exactly 8 hours of sleep every day. I can't sleep any more, any less. Ever since I was little, it was like clockwork. I would go to bed without my parents telling me, and I would wake up like clockwork. So that's just how I'm wired. I've been in the media for a little over 15 years now. I started 3 years before 9/11. I have worked for only one mainstream news organization, and that is CNN. I left CNN about a year and a half ago, and I'm now an independent media consultant and strategist. I'm also the co-founder of the I Speak for Myself book series, which I hope all of you know about. If not, I'd be happy to share more. I was born in Maryland and raised in Georgia, so my southern accent, I'm sure, is coming out quite vehemently right now.
Awesome. Maria, I don't know if you remember, but years ago when Muslim Girl was just a baby and I was in high school, I remember getting an email from you when I Speak for Myself was first coming out, actually. And it was you introducing the book, letting us know what it was about, and seeing a way that we can cover it. So I kind of want to go back to that, like the roots of the book, and talk about where the concept of it came from and how you were able to get the ball rolling, with that idea.
So the book really started as a project. I was actually sitting in the apartment of my now co-founder, she then became the co-editor of the first book in the series, Zara Suratwala. Zara lives in Chicago, and it was really cold, and it was snowy and windy, and we were holed up in our house, and I said, we should do something fun. And so the one thing that we both had in common was our love for writing and the fact that we were both Muslim and from the same community. And so we sort of came up with this idea, like in one day, sitting in her living room, and sort of put a little book proposal together, and then decided we were just going to put a collection of stories together about Muslim American women just like ourselves, who were born and raised in this country, who have never known, who've always sort of seen our identities kind of work together in many ways, and also have tension with one another in many ways. And so we wanted to bring those stories together because, me being in the mainstream media at the time, I could see every day how my religion was criticized on the air and off the air, and stereotyped on the air and off the air. And I really just wanted people to see for themselves the kind of lives that people that I know live every day. And so that's how the first book came about. The title was I Speak for Myself, American Women on Being Muslim. And very soon after that book published, we were having lots of people ask us, well, where's the men's version of this? And, have you thought about doing, continuing with the series? And so very quickly after the book published, we were still on our book tour, we decided to incorporate. And so I Speak for Myself has become a franchise, very much like Chicken Soup for the Soul. And so we solicit proposals, and we ourselves are publishers of these books. We have an independent publisher that we work with, and our main theme with I Speak for Myself is, you have to have a focus, and our vision is to really tell stories that involve faith and culture. And so, we did the second book on Muslim men, and then we did a little bit of a departure and did a collection of stories on young Arabs who were involved with the Arab Spring movements. And then we moved on to Christian men and women and did 2 different volumes featuring men and women. And then, in the next couple of months, we'll be publishing what I think is one of the best books in the collection so far, and that's called Faithfully Feminist, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Women on Why We Stay.
It's beautiful. It sounds so smooth, right? Like you got this wonderful idea with your co-founder for the book, and then you decided to put it into motion. But what are the first steps that a Muslim woman can take if she does want to get her voice out there? And I think that's a question that we can pose to everyone.
Oh yeah, I think the only thing I would say is in one word. It's just write. Write anywhere, any place, anyhow you can. Just write.
I would say online blogs are a great place to start. There's a lot of different platforms that we can utilize to kind of just jot our thoughts down, even if it's a personal diary that you begin with, and just, if you're sitting on the metro and you have time during the morning or in the morning commute or in the evening commute, just begin jotting down your thoughts. And it's really funny, when you start writing, sometimes you don't really expect it to, but the words just kind of flow sometimes, and it becomes easier to shape your thoughts the more that you write. So I would really strongly encourage folks to keep on writing.
And I think that it's also really important to remember is that when you are writing, there's personal writing and then there's writing for an audience. And when you get to that point where you want to be writing for an audience, it's important to remember that there's a level of vulnerability that you're putting yourself in as well, and that you're showing rather, and that's okay. That's, I think, every writer, because every time you write something, you're putting a part of yourself out there in the public, and as we know, the public court of opinion now especially is pretty much infinite. So I think I've said it before also, is that you need to have thick skin when you're a writer, and I think especially as a woman, especially as a Muslim woman, given current atmospheres and kind of the kind of air of always suspicion and questioning that comes depending on whatever topics you're covering and whatnot. I think it's important to also have a good support system there, and just know what you're also jumping into, is that it's not about it's not about giving a voice to the voiceless, which I think is sometimes how it'll be framed, but oftentimes it's just about how do we amplify our voices and other voices in our community. And I think with women, Muslim women in particular, it's so important that we ourselves are a support system for each other. Even if we may be at some points, competition or whatever, I think it's important that we, kind of stay, like pat each other on the back or support each other when it gets tough and whatnot. So.
Just to add on to a little bit what Sana said, I think it's really important to make that distinction that when you're writing something, you have to be aware that people are going to form opinions, and they're going to have they might judge you based on what it is that you're writing. And especially as a Muslim woman, you kind of find yourself in a situation where you may not be comfortable with how people are perceiving you to be. So just, especially whatever platform you're writing on, especially if it's online, just make sure that you're comfortable with whatever the topic is that's going to be put out there. Because one general rule of thumb is that if you're going to put it out there, then you should expect that you're going to get feedback or criticism. And that's not a bad thing. It's good to get criticism because that helps you grow and become a better, more prolific writer. But you just have to develop a thicker skin, like Sana was saying.
And also treat it like a conversation. Like, I think for me what was key when I started writing years ago was that I was always, when you're putting something out there, look for the fact that, it also depends on what kind of writing you want to do, but if you put something out there, wait for also, you want conversation. Like, that's the best part, I think, about writing, especially, I'm talking specifically also about nonfiction writing, is that it's, you want people to be talking to each other about it and to you about it, because not only does it help you grow as a writer in terms of your ability, your prose and all that, but it also helps you personally develop your own ideas. I mean, there are so many times when I've put something out there and even if it's something barely anyone's read, but a few people have commented on it, we've talked about it, and it's resulted in me re-examining, well, do I believe this? What do I believe about this? What do I think about this? That's a great question. I didn't consider that, and so on and so forth. And I think writing it's a holistic experience and a holistic exercise, in that it really, for me, for instance, it's as much a political exercise as much as it is a cathartic exercise, as much as it is a spiritual exercise, and all of this, because it can have that effect on you and on others too. It can really affect others spiritually or politically or emotionally or what have you, both in a positive and negative way.
And it's okay to evolve. You might write something, you start off writing something, and years later you might look back at it and be like, oh my God, that was me, I wrote that, and I don't even believe that anymore. And that's perfectly okay. Sometimes we tend to shy away from expressing our thoughts because just like that, what if I don't believe this tomorrow? But and especially with the internet, where everything is everywhere and it gets shared so immediately, that was one of my first things when I came from a television news production background, and so where you don't get feedback, and this was like in the late 90s, and you didn't get feedback immediately, to blogging, and I remember my first actual blog that went like everywhere, and I saw the comments that were being posted, and I was just like, oh my God, what am I doing here? I don't want. And but subhanallah, you just have to take that and move on. Be like, okay, fine. This is. It can get. You will see the dark side of the internet. Definitely, you'll see there'll be many trolls. There might be people who will just tell you, as a Muslim woman, you just need to shut up. And you just have to get beyond that, and just,
And just really, really quick comment to Hannah's awesome comment is also, do not read the comment section. Like that is, I feel like if I write a book, my first book is probably going to be, do not read the comment section. That's what I'm going to call it, because that's where humanity goes to die. Seriously.
It's interesting because in the comments section, there's a lot of room to kind of, I guess, figure out how people are responding to what your thoughts are. But some of the comments, especially depending on what the topic is, can be pretty jaw-dropping. So it's if you're gonna read the comments section, just kind of mentally prepare yourself first for what may or may not be there.
Absolutely. And I think Hannah made a really excellent point about the evolution that comes with putting your voice out there. And I can speak to this personally because, like I said, I started Muslim Girl when I was in high school. So it is a chronological record of basically my evolution with my identity and my understanding of Islam. And the articles are all still up there from like back 2009. And sometimes I look back at them and I'm just like, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. Why did I say that? Or like, why did I think that way? But I think that they serve as a resource now, like that's you recording your journey as well. I mean, we're all in this together. We're all in the midst of this very pivotal period where we're developing the modern Muslim identity in the United States or in whatever country that we come from, and it's something that's very unique to our time period. And speaking of putting ourselves out there and being vulnerable with the internet, Sana, you are our inaugural Baddie of the Month for doing just that. It's been quite an outrageous conversation that we've been having on social media, actually, in regards to the Muslim Leadership Initiative. And you really put yourself out there with your opinion. And, well, before we even get into, the type of audience that you wrote to or any pressures of censorship that you might have faced, I think that one question that is on everyone's mind that wants to get involved with the internet is, how did you build your audience in the first place? Like what were the chances that you would publish this article and it would go viral and reach literally the entire Muslim community and become a very formative topic for us this year?
My favorite topic. So in terms of building an audience, so it's interesting. So I started writing when I actually started off as a fiction writer, which one huge piece of advice to any writer that I give is do fiction writing, write poetry, even if it's bad poetry, write it. Write short stories, and read a lot of fiction, because fiction, especially good fiction in particular, has a beautiful literary voice, and I think it's so important for good nonfiction writers to have a good literary voice, because it helps us articulate the message that we're trying to get across much better in a much more accessible language. All my years of grad school, unfortunately, gave me a bit too much of a academic kind of framework for the language I use. I'm trying to get out of that right now. But in terms of building my audience, I mean, I started blogging. Putting aside LiveJournal back in like 05, 06, I started blogging in 2005 actually, and it was just here and there, nothing major. And the only reason I wanted to start blogging was because I'm like, I have all these opinions and I don't have an outlet to get them out on, and internet, maybe you'll listen, and that's what I did. I think for me personally, like I never was also seeking an audience. For me, it was always just a matter of there are conversations happening, a lot of conversations about me and people who look like me, about Muslim women in hijab, about Muslims, about Islam, and I want to be a part of this conversation. And I think that was always my intention, was to be a part of this conversation. And I just started writing, and I wanted to get my stuff out. I just started. I used to send to everyone. The pieces I wrote back in 2007 and 8 were not that great at all by any standard, but I would still send them out, and I can't believe some of the pieces I sent out to some very reputable outlets. Hopefully they don't remember me. But, you know, it was just a matter of like, oh, listen to me, listen to my voice, listen to what I have to say, and just keeping at it. And I think it's also important is that you need to, as a writer, one of your tool is your voice. What makes you you, right? Distinguishing yourself and not necessarily doing it in a way that's mechanical or like I need to find myself. Like, what is my voice? Rather, developing it. You know, as and I also mentioned about evolution, and I think just kind of being. It's so cliche, and I hate to say it, but it is really all about being yourself. You know, the way I talk to my friends, for instance, is exactly how I talk when I'm on Twitter. And Twitter was actually a huge tool for me. I mean, I joined back in 2009, so it was a huge tool for me to mouth off there too. And I really do attribute you know, Twitter to helping me build particular, not following per se, but I would say networks in various communities, specifically in the Muslim community. I mean, at that point I was in Canada, and so it helped me kind of bridge, you know, it helped build a bridge between me and people I wanted to talk to, people who I never otherwise thought I would have had this kind of connection to or I'd be able to speak with. And so I attribute a lot of it to the networks that I was, you know, that I was able to build through Twitter. And even on Twitter, like if you look at some of my tweets from even like 3 years ago, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe she was saying that, but I was. And it's a matter of, as I said, it's if you really do believe in what you're saying, but you're not being overzealous or, you know, so reactionary and whatnot, and you're having conversations with people, which I think I've always, even on Twitter, is having constant conversations, which is very, very difficult, and also is why I have 50,000 tweets at this point, is because I have those conversations. But I think if you kind of show that sort of accessibility as well as a writer, especially if you're a writer who's focusing on community issues. So if as a Muslim writer you want to talk about issues of the community and you want the community to respond to them, it's important for you to be involved with that community in various levels, and one of which was through, for me, social media. And I think because of that, so when I wrote that piece, I mean, I think, you know, whether, so for instance, about Muslim Leadership Initiative, I think that piece, even had my name not been necessarily attached to it, I think it would have garnered a lot of attention as well. But I think at that point, it was the timing of the piece and kind of what it was discussing and laying it all out. I think that all of that also attributed to it sparking this conversation.
Now, when it comes to having conversations, one thing that I've witnessed in these conversations, and having them especially revolve around our place in media or in the community, there's a huge double standard that exists, right? So it's like, if Muslim women want to have a conversation, it's almost a requirement that we need to include Muslim men in it, or else it's just a women's conversation, and no one else feels the need to get involved in it. But at the same time, hosting entire events about women's empowerment and not have a single woman be included, even though the discussion is about women. And I think it was interesting for me to know, Maria, that when you published I Speak for Myself, you started receiving a response from Muslim men saying, you know, why don't you also include the narratives of Muslim men, tell our stories as well? Do you feel the same way? Do you think that Muslim women deserve more attention when it comes to these topics, or do you think that it's important for us to maintain that type of like 1-to-1 ratio?
Well, I mean, I think Muslim women deserve more attention simply because, frankly, there's more negativity thrown at us in the media. And so we have to sort of almost counteract that by doing 2 for 1. You know, I'm producing, for example, a global women's conference right now. And, you know, one of the issues that has come up is, you know, we have too many women speakers versus not enough men. And I think, you know, for the conversation about women to move forward, especially in regards to our community, we have to involve men in those conversations. But that doesn't mean the men lead the conversation. So to your point earlier about, you know, male-driven conversation about Muslim women's issues. I absolutely abhor that and think that that's not, it's not the right way to go. But I think men should certainly be involved in the conversations themselves.
Sometimes,
sure, please.
And sometimes the audience is the men, right? And so sometimes we are talking and we're talking amongst ourselves, but where we really need it to take place and the effect that needs to go out is amongst the men, So that's why I feel like sometimes we do need to include the men in these conversations, because something that I work with a lot of Muslim men, and fact is, men tend to listen to Muslim men. I mean, we can fight against it, we can stand up, and so I really believe that to take our allies and use them seriously.
I think there is definitely a place to have Muslim men join into the conversation with Muslim women, especially just for example, the most recently the all-women's mosque that opened up in California. There was a lot of backlash there from different parts of the country and the world, really, in response to the fact that, oh, well, why do women have this need to have an all-female mosque? And for a lot of men, like, they couldn't understand why we needed that space, or why the women in that area in California needed that space where they could worship freely without worrying about how they were going to be treated, without worrying about barriers being erected and like side entrances that didn't really welcome them. There wasn't really, a concern of whether or not it was a safe space for them. And one thing that I found was really interesting was that there were a lot of Muslim men who came to the forefront and championed like this initiative, and who really stood up for the women who were taking on this project of creating a safe space for other Muslim women. And there was even some backlash from Muslim women who objected to the idea of a female-only mosque, who felt that, oh, well, why are we segregating ourselves from the men? So it wasn't from an avenue that we would expect criticism from, but it was interesting to see how many Muslim men like jumped to the defense of the women who were creating this safe space for Muslim women for themselves in this community. So I definitely think that we should create a space for allies, regardless of gender, who respect the fact that women should be valued and that women should have a right to shape their own narrative without being spoken for, that they should be able to speak for themselves.
So, in case anyone missed that, Sana needs to get her charger, so she'll be back momentarily. Zainab, one thing that I think is really funny is, or kind of sad actually, I think is reflected in a cartoon that I just saw when I was scrolling through like Facebook or something, and it was a cartoon of a woman in an office meeting, like at a round table, and the boss, the male boss says, "Oh, like to the woman, like Sarah or whatever, like that's an excellent suggestion. Is there any man that would like to make it?" So it kind of speaks to the fact that Muslim women, or women in general, their contributions, their voices aren't legitimized unless they are echoed by men, and men back them up or say, yeah, we should, listen to them and things like that. Now, you're a spokesperson for the largest Muslim organization in the country. Do you feel like, when it's your voice that's out there at the press conferences, it's your face, your hijab, that's making, like, part of all these headlines taking place in these conversations that we're having at a national level, do you feel like you face challenges with getting your thoughts or your words, your opinions to be well received by the Muslim community and the general public?
That's it's pretty funny, because when I first started working with CARE, I didn't really have a background in communications. I actually went to pharmacy school, and I worked as a pharmacist for many years before I made the transition into civil rights work. But I will say that it has been very challenging at times, especially working within certain communities and within certain organizations, or partnering with certain organizations. It has been challenging creating a space for myself as a Muslim activist who happens to be a female. And I will say that one thing that's worked to my advantage has been that I'm very headstrong. I'm the type of person that if you tell me it can't be done, I will do it just to prove that it can be done. So the one piece of advice that I would give girls and young women who want to get involved in the media and in the public sphere is don't give up. Just because somebody tells you no, it can't be done, don't listen to them. It's really important to know your own mind, to know what it is that you want, what the message is that you want to convey, and to be able to like create your own way of saying it without being intimidated by the fact that you happen to be the only woman in the room or the only woman at the podium who's given the microphone to speak her voice. I think one thing that's worked to my advantage is that I'm the only sister of 3 brothers, so I grew up in a male-dominated Punjabi family. So for anybody who knows what it's like to be born and raised into a Punjabi family, it's you're surrounded by people who are very like opinionated, and they're not all the time. That's probably a stereotype, but my family is very loud and boisterous and opinionated. So I grew up, and it was kind of like in an environment where you have to make a space to express yourself. So I'm not easily intimidated by being surrounded by male spokespeople. And I think that that's one thing that might be a challenge for Muslim women who want to get their voice out there and make their voices be heard. How do you work up the courage to approach a group of men or brothers and say that you want to be a part of the conversation? And it's not easy, and it's really easy to, especially initially, become intimidated. But I think that one thing we have to realize is that if we're not speaking for ourselves, then we're allowing others to speak for us. And if we allow them to do that, then the message that they have to convey is not necessarily something that we're going to agree with. So either we can remain silent and allow others to speak for us, or we can make sure that our voices are heard. And it's this kind of mindset that really kind of allowed me to become more comfortable working in the public realm. I mean, I won't say that I'm always comfortable all the time. Sometimes there's definitely instances where I feel, a little bit intimidated, and that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly normal. But the important thing to remember is to not allow that intimidation or that feeling of intimidation from preventing you to speaking your mind and saying what it is that needs to be said.
I'm going to piggyback off of Zainab because I report on the community that she represents. And often at time, it's what I see is she's so calm, and you don't have to be, and she maintains this this aura of like being present, and just in charge. And so alhamdulillah, that really helps. You don't have to be loud, and she's not. She's very collected, and that really, and soft-spoken too, but it really like gets through to people that way. A lot of our community, especially Muslim communities in the United States, are very male-dominated. There's just Muslim spaces, and as a reporter, to go into those Muslim spaces and actually report on what's going on, it is extremely difficult. It is, but I have found like one thing that's helped, honestly, has been my hijab. Maybe it's a privilege or something, but having the hijab on and walking into it, it makes it eases the conversation. I don't know why. Sometimes people will look at you and think that, oh my God, why is this sister here? Like, what is she? Like, I remember I was covering the opening of a restaurant, and it was everybody there was a male, and most of them were really, elderly scholars and from that community, and it was just so strange being in there, and everybody turned around and looked at me, and I really did feel like walking out. Like, why did you call me here? And but you don't walk out at that time. Or when Muslim men want to honor you by giving you asking you to cover their event, but then seating you separately from everybody else who's watching the presentation. Things like that. And at that time, you just have to, reach inside and just get that out that, no, this is not acceptable. This is not honoring me, and I refuse to be treated this way. And you can say that in a way that gets through,
And those are really, both the points made are fantastic by Zainab and Henna. And I really wanted to also touch on and piggyback off of Henna's point about the accessibility via the hijab. And I'm actually working currently on a piece about kind of like my year of dejabbing. It's been about, I used to wear the hijab for 13 years and I took it off, which was a very interesting experience as someone who's kind of in a Muslim public space, for that to happen, and talked about issues about the hijab and talked about issues about the community, etc. And I think that's something that's always interesting. I mean, in general, in any kind of community, whatever, there's always about accessibility, and the more trusted you are, the better access you have. And I think, especially in Muslim spaces, not only are they, as mentioned, male-dominated, but definitely there is, the hijab is definitely a sort of an access, and it makes it difficult to enter those spaces without it. Like, I mean, I've been in those positions where I'm like, trying, you can see the difference in treatment, and it's unfortunate, but I mean, it is as it is, and it's something that we should be also talking about and whatnot. But I think one of the most important points also mentioned by Henna about Zainab is basically about owning your space. It's so, which is, I think, such, like, by the way, a San Francisco thing maybe to say. I think I've been living here now too long. But, it's kind of being confident in your abilities and what you can offer. I think it's something like over 50, almost 60 or 70% of women who hold some sort of professional office, or not office, but position, have what they call the imposter syndrome, right? Where there's this constant feeling of, I openly admit to it too, like, I don't think it's anything, shameful, but I think it's symptomatic of the sort of unfortunate social cards that we've been dealt in terms of how we're told to envision ourselves as women in a professional working space. But because of that, we sometimes get afraid, as the imposter syndrome goes, about our abilities, of whether are we worth it, or are we actually qualified for this, or, I'm saying this, will people believe me if I say this? And it's very difficult, and it takes practice, but it's so important to be confident in what you are saying, in what you believe, in what you want to learn. And if there is something you want to change, be confident in that change that you want to create, in the conversations you want to create and have as well. And whatever space it is that you are occupying in that moment, whether it's this physical space of you standing in a room in front of people, or if it's this mental, religious, this sort of, internal space of just how you're going through your professional career or on your way to getting towards that professional career, it's so important for us as women, as Muslim women, to be confident in that. Even if that confidence doesn't come easily and it's not always there, I think it's so important for us to, at least even if it's just for a moment, hold that confidence. And
it's like they say, fake it till you make it, right?
Exactly. That's pretty much a long-winded way of saying fake it till you make it, which is how I also, which is the title of my second book, by the way.
Nice.
Now, by the same token, I've been waiting to say that for a while. By the same token, what kind of tokenization have each of you faced, if at all, as Muslim women in your respective careers, and the opportunities that you've been afforded, both inside or outside of the Muslim community, for your hijab or for not wearing it? Have you faced tokenization, and in what way?
I was definitely asked to write about, I say the same things today that I said like a year ago about Muslim women and hijab and all that. But before, I was really definitely asked a lot more to write on those issues. So I was getting like editors from different, I mean, mind you, sometimes when they'd ask me to write, I'm like, no, I don't think you've read my tweets if you think I want to write about that. But, being asked a lot more to talk about women's issues and talk about hijab and, oh, it's in the news again. Can you talk about it, write about it? Can we interview you about it? And now it's really interesting to see it less and less and less. And I think this, just talking about Muslim women, not about the hijab in particular, but just about Muslim women's issues, which I think also speaks to how the media itself focuses on very lineal representations, of the voices, not voices rather, but sorry, the very linear representations of Muslim women themselves, and who can talk about issues. It comes down to that: who can talk about certain issues, whatever those issues are. So that's been kind of interesting, kind of this reverse tokenization for the past year.
I want to jump in there because when I was working for CNBC Asia, I did not wear hijab, and I left my career when I started hijab because they would not put a reporter on TV with hijab on. There was just no two ways about it, and it was difficult. It was difficult leaving everything, I came to a point where it was like, okay, either it's hijab or a career in media. And subhanAllah, like that was, 15 years ago, and I look at myself now, and I putting a little bit of spirituality in there, Allah gives it back. So circumstances change. Yes, I'm not acceptable to mainstream media maybe, but alhamdulillah, there is a need for Muslim media, and we need that. We need to support Muslim media. We need to have so this is, and we need to have hijabis on mainstream media too, so inshallah, that's something else.
That reminds me of Henna's story. Reminds me of Mariam Sob, who's one of the essayists in the first volume of I Speak for Myself, and I really got to know Mariam not only through her essay, but just got to know her personally, and she's an aspiring, still to this day, an aspiring hijabi reporter who really wants to be on air, and she's been through a lot. She's had a lot of interviews, and a lot of people look at her and almost made it on air one time, and then it just I really feel for people in the industry that for women who are wearing hijab. In fact, they're more brilliant. There's a lot of people that I used to work with in my former news organization who wore hijab and could have been brilliant on air, but I just don't think that mainstream media is ready for that yet. And as somebody that worked with a lot of talent, and this is something that I really focus on now in my consulting. The development of talent is really important in our community right now. To Henna's point, I'm really happy that I'm not in mainstream right now because, first of all, it's nice to not get paged or beeped in all hours of the day and not to be involved in a 24/7 news cycle. But it really has allowed me to take a step back and kind of look at where the need is. And one of the first projects I worked on right after I left CNN was to help relaunch one of the oldest Muslim publications here in this country. It's called the Muslim Observer. And I really believe, and I have since I Speak for Myself, I've believed this, actually since starting at CNN, that the stories that we own as a community are our stories, and we should be the first to tell them. I spent over a decade in mainstream media, and I can say firsthand that the story about our community is only one that should be told first by our own community, because we're the people that are able to more authentically tell it. And as far as being a token, I can definitely attest to being the token Muslim. When I left CNN, I was the highest ranking Muslim woman in mainstream media. To this day, I don't see that. I haven't been able to see a Muslim woman in management ranks. And part of what I'm doing right now is really making sure that I'm providing spaces and developmental opportunities for Muslim women to pursue the path of media, but not just be in the reporting ranks, to actually grow and nurture women in this industry. It takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of effort. And what you're doing, Amani, I was doing a little bit of research about sort of how far you've come. When I started in the media, there were just I could count on my one hand the number of Muslim women in the industry. And what Amani has done in the past year and a half with Muslim Girl, there's a lot to be said about not only the need for it and the audience for it, but more importantly, what can be done by one person. And, I remember one of the fondest memories I have at CNN was actually one of the last shows that I ever produced with Christiane Amanpour, and it involves Malala Yousafzai. And Malala said, it wasn't during this show, but Malala once said, when the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful. And that's what I really believe about what we're doing in terms of media in our own community. So I'd love to spend a little bit of time talking about that, because I think what Henna is doing is really important. And we need, as a community of people that are constantly imbibing mainstream media, we need to find ways to support and sustain Muslim-owned media, because that's where the longevity of our stories will be. That's where, you know, our aunties, our uncles, when we grow up, we want to be able to see our faces on the front page of newspapers every single day. And it's in these outlets that we're going to find that.
And I think what, you know, and this is coming from my, you know, being a producer for AJ Plus, which is all digital, is also that, I mean, there's mainstream media, which does definitely create and sustain a particular popular narrative, or narratives rather, but I think we also have to look at how these alternative spaces, online spaces especially, are gaining incredible popularity. I mean, what we consider mainstream media, specifically on our TVs and radio, whatever, is also looking to online. Like, what are people paying attention to online? What are the stories that people are watching online? And everyone's trying to get online as well and kind of own that space, haha, to borrow my own expression earlier. But I think it's important that, you know, exactly as Maria just said, as Hannah was saying too, it's that we need to not only be creating our own media, but supporting the media that exists within our communities currently. Because for us to challenge those overarching narratives about us in the mainstream, we need to first figure out how we're going to challenge that. And the best way, I believe, to challenge that is to have those kind of conversations internally, to know what's happening in our communities across the country, also across the world. I think it's important to know, but especially across the country. And when we're more informed about ourselves, the trends that are happening, when we're developing, I think as Maria also mentioned, developing talent, recognizing that talent, pushing it forward, then it becomes harder and harder and harder for that sort of mainstream narrative and the mainstream outlets to ignore it as well. And I think that we just need to, like something like this, like having this sort of you know, Google Hangout is a fantastic example of how online space should be utilized. And so, yeah, I think it's awesome.
And I can say, as somebody who regularly interacts with mainstream media, there definitely is a space for Muslim media to really come into its own. Just the idea of having a place, a platform where we hear stories that, especially our parents who might be immigrants or first-generation Americans, that they can read these headlines and they can actually relate to. There's such a clear bias in the way that stories are reported when there's Muslims involved, even if there aren't Muslims involved, but the way that stories are portrayed in mainstream media, like they really have a tremendous impact on shaping the public's perception of who we are, not just as Muslim women, but also as an ummah. So there's definitely a space for supporting Muslim media, and I think that Sana was right on when she said that it's not just about media like television or radio that we see or hear, but social media has a tremendous impact as well. I mean, just for example, in the Arab Spring, in Egypt, the social media had such a tremendous role to play in galvanizing the public. For the first time in modern history, women were they played such an instrumental role in helping to shape policies and they contributed so much to so many different aspects of Arab society. And I think we're really starting to harness that platform, and we're really starting to see like the advent of, for example, Muslim Girl that Amani has done an incredible job on, but so many other platforms that we see Muslims really making a tremendous impact. With Al Jazeera America, when it was established in the DC area in the United States, one thing that really excited me about that was that finally there's a news outlet that, you know, we can be more assured that there would be a more accurate perception of stories that pertain to Islam and Muslims that would be portrayed in the media. And sure enough, now initially there was a lot of backlash and there was a lot of criticism for Al Jazeera America, but now there's definitely, you see stories that are retweeted or quoted on platforms and in avenues that you wouldn't necessarily expect it to. So initially there might be resistance, but I think if we keep at it, it'll be something that will pick up and inshallah build more momentum. But there's definitely a space to support Muslim media. I think, Henna, you're doing a tremendous job with Muslim Matters, and we should support those kind of platforms that really help us tell our stories and get our stories out there.
I think one of the things that we're working on right now is, like, we see a lot in that space, because Muslim Matters it's a mix, because it's a spiritual space too, because we address a lot of Islamic topics too, but getting political views heard on there, and one of the and also with, for example, like, we just started doing a series on intimacy, or topics like that are not addressed within traditional Muslim societies in the way that they are addressed in other spaces. And then it seems like that Muslim women don't have a voice, or we only have men speaking for us, again, going back to that. So that's something that we're trying to do, and it's hard getting the people involved to actually get behind it. Like, we see, like, so many people, like, I see the hits, that we're getting so many hits on it, but having people share it, right? So so people are still shy to share it, stuff like that. So alhamdulillah, yeah, definitely there's some great work. I think one of the best things that happened, one of the things that I know my children saw, so after the Chapel Hill murders, not one, we didn't have any mainstream papers at that time, newspapers, like, calling it terrorism, and our community needed to hear that, see that. So one of the things that the Muslim Link did was ran just the headline, "It is terrorism to us," because our community was terrorized. They felt that way. Even that was what we were hearing in our in our community. So just having that space to be able to edit a headline and show it for what it is, like we were talking about the German wings incident this morning, because it's not going to be, it's always going to be mental health issues, lone wolf, suicide, the person is having issues, but it's never going to be called what it is because the person was not Muslim.
And I also really also want to point out that when we talk about supporting Muslim media and Muslim created media, it's not just about sharing or liking or reading or commenting, but it actually does mean, financially supporting.
Financially.
Because, and I can tell you this as a writer, who I don't think I've ever really made any money at all writing, but that's not why I do it. I don't do it for the money because there's none in it. But I think that it's so important. I was a part of a blog called Kebab Fest years ago, which was it was called the Irreverent Arab American (parentheses and others) activist blog, and it was a great space. It was fun, snarky. It was very tackled so many issues regarding Muslims and Arabs. It was one of, I think, the first blogs to kind of emerge in the space that it did, to do what it was doing, which was talking about media coverage and narratives about Arabs, about Muslims, about other minority groups in this post 9/11 atmosphere and the United States, and and it was ultimately what I think ended it, as it no longer is active, is that we had new writers, but writers need to eat. Because when you're writing is labor. Writing isn't easy. Like, here, write me a blog post on this. It's not easy. It's actual labor. And it was hard to sustain this incredible space because of that. We had, there was another great, and especially when you're an independent blog and you're in a sphere, that's very corporatized blogosphere now as well. It's very hard to sustain yourself. There was another great blog called Sepia Munity, which was Mutiny, and it was run, basically, it was like a South Asian space, and it was this fantastic, fantastic space. But I remember one of their last posts was exactly about this, in which they said that it's becoming really hard to compete when you're volunteer run, and you have these massive corporatized blogs now coming out, and like Gawker, and at this point BuzzFeed, before BuzzFeed was even a verb, And I think it's important that we read, we share, and all of that, but we recognize that there's actual labor going into every word that we're reading. It's mental labor, it's physical labor. Believe it or not, sitting in a chair is not that easy for 4 hours at a time. But it's something that we need to recognize, that if we find a writer that we support or an outlet that we support them in any way that we can, because it's detrimental, I think, to our health as a community.
I've spent a lot of time in the past 6 months researching ethnic media in the United States, and I don't know if you all know, but it's the fastest growing media in the United States. And I think you're seeing a trend emerge in that people, there's this sort of sense of going back to community, and it's kind of like akin to when I get tired of looking at Facebook, I shut it off. And I think what people are tired of is a lot of noise, and they really want a sense of belonging and a sense of community. And so people are more and more often, I mean, Imani could probably attest to this with the people that have, come to her for Muslim Girl. People want to hear stories about their own communities. And, I'm not trying to plug Muslim Observer, but what I will say about that newspaper is that it has a business model. I was hired. I did not volunteer for 6 months. I was hired to create a business strategy for them, one in which all of their writers are paid for their work. And so the moment that our community starts realizing that there's value, there's monetary value in the work that we do as journalists, is the moment that everything changes. And so all of these, I'm really curious about all of these wonderful Muslim media startups that are popping up. I mean, they're everywhere. Wide, just recently wrote a wonderful piece about the top 50 most innovative Muslim startups. I mean, it's stories like that, right? That, if that was akin to a Forbes article, it would easily get monetized. And so there are ways to do this. We just have to be smarter about how we approach it, and we have to approach non-traditional sources. But I'm the number one proponent of making sure that Muslim talent gets paid, because I understand the value of that. I mean, we're not going to see more journalists if we're not paying them now for their writing. Even if you're in college, you deserve to be paid for your thoughts.
Definitely.
I can personally say that Muslim Girl, we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary of, from
Yay!
when we started blogging it from our, little girl bedrooms, and we're on the internet and stuff like that. Not a single person that has ever contributed to Muslim Girl or currently writes for Muslim Girl has been compensated a dime for our work. It's been entirely, from our hearts, and I think that that's something that oftentimes is exploited and neglected within the Muslim community, is that a lot of our initiatives are coming from just very great intentions of wanting to just create change, wanting to give back somehow, wanting to, just reshape the way that society views us in the media, that we're that willing to do it, that put in that much hard work for free, just so that we can see some type of, positive impact. And yeah, please.
That's preposterous to me. That's good.
That's how Muslim Matters started as well, and we're trying. We didn't want to take advertising for so long, so we just recently, in the past couple of years, started taking advertising, and it bothered some of our readers. And Mariam, one of the things that I'm scared of is that I don't want to lose our independent voice. Right now, if we have a small shura, if the shura agrees, it goes on. If I agree, it goes on. I take money from somewhere. What if they start dictating to me what I can and what I cannot put on there? And that's something that really worries me. And there, especially right now, there's a lot of CVE money coming from God knows where, and I lose my audience if anybody even thinks that I'm taking any CVE money.
Well, I mean, you obviously have standards and practices set up within your own organizations to determine what ads you will and will not accept. I mean, these kinds of S&P divisions are set up in every major media organization, and our Muslim media needs to evolve to that kind of standardized process as well. I mean, you don't just take an ad because someone's throwing money at you. I mean, you obviously look at it and make sure that there's no conflict of interest there. But I really, again, I mean, I think there are ways to do this. I mean, we're $1 billion consumer market. There are people that need our eyeballs on their product. I mean, everybody from Ford Motors to fruit vendors. You have to sort of, I mean, so there's an aggressive sales strategy that needs to happen within these media organizations, and that's something I think that we should work really hard to cultivate.
And I just want to say, as a millennial Muslim, that I will like to assume that I speak on behalf of most millennial Muslims when I say that we really do need mentorship from people, like who we have on this panel, like people that are more experienced, that have been there, done that, they understand the industry, they know what to do. A lot of us do need that guidance, and I think that it's important for us to come together to make sure that our youth aren't being exploited for their initiatives and what they're doing, and that they're getting properly supported as well.
I think one way to address that would also be to raise more awareness within the Muslim community. I think that there's some communities where there isn't really any knowledge about why they should support Muslim media or what that even means. I think people, they don't tend to financially support or contribute to a cause until they see how it's going to positively benefit them or impact them or their lives. And even if it's just like a training or like some kind of presentation that can be put together for whichever platform it is that you want to raise money for, pitch it to a community leader or somebody who's pretty well connected and find out if they would be willing to either host a private fundraiser, or if you want to title it as something else, just some kind of event where you would be able to make your case for why the community needs to support you. What are you providing for the community? What kind of causes? What's the benefit of them financially supporting you, and how is that going to impact their children? I think one thing that, especially with our community, that they are really vested in is in the next generation. They want to know that whatever it is that they're investing in is going to positively impact the next generation. So that would be maybe one avenue that you could explore to see how to raise more awareness within the Muslim community about the need to support these kind of platforms.
I think it's also really key, and this goes for this particular conversation and kind of the previous ones we've been having, is that especially if we're going to be involved in creating and sustaining Muslim media, it's also that if we are writers or editors or people who are reading, or consuming rather these different forms of Muslim media, then I think we also need to remember not to silo ourselves just into Muslim issues and Muslim media only and Muslim only workshops. It's very important for us to have those for sure, but it's also so important for us to reach out to others who've kind of been through this as well, to reach out to if there's a workshop happening that, okay, it's not Muslim specific, but it's a workshop that you can go to it. It's so important that we take from and learn from all different avenues that are available to us, that we can have access to, that we can reach out to, and not just keep it so insular, only because opening it up that way, it just allows us to build our own media institutions in a much more holistic and better way. We can learn so much from, Maria's coming from, having worked with CNN, and, I've been seeing her name around and herself around for a long, long time, and, she's bringing that experience also into now, and I think it's fantastic. That's exactly what we need, is that kind of experience, and kind of try to have our feet in kind of our feet and hands in all the different communities and circles that we encompass already, and our media should reflect that the different circles the social circles that we'll end up encompassing as well.
I think that I really want to upon with this like Muslim media space, right, and this emerging new media from the Muslim community. I want to talk about who our audience really is, because, you know, like you said, it's really important for us to talk about, you know, whether they affect specifically the Muslim community. And like, for example, one article that was really successful this year so far was our article on Mia Khalifa, who is a Lebanese porn star. She became the #1 porn star on Pornhub, and her top video was of her wearing a headscarf and nothing but. And, you know, the concept of hijabi porn was coined by Mia Abul Iz, our sex columnist, through our our online blog, you know. And it reached a point where the virality of that article, it made it so there was not a single mainstream outlet that could even talk about or cover Mia Khalifa without also citing us and bringing up the points that we raised about her. And that's great, right? I mean, like, that's the whole point, is that we inject in there, you know. But at the same time, we also got a lot of hate ourselves and from our Muslim community. I still remember that there was one email that we received from a Muslim saying, you know, I came to your website because I was expecting it to be Islamic, and the first article that I see is about porn, and I'm going to be contacting every like Muslim figure that I know to let them know that you all are a fraud and you're not really about Islam. You don't know what you're talking about. And that was kind of like, well, since we were like gaining so much visibility, it was like, wait, we also don't want to lose our Muslim audience as well. So who really are we writing for? Like, who are we trying to reach, and how can we do so without really offending the community that we are based in?
No, and I think that's such a good point, and that's the struggle of any kind of you know, I think independent media organization, what have you, is when you begin to expand, whether your content is expanding or your business is expanding or whatever, it's like, how do you, and that's a question I think, and it differs from each organization or outlet to another, you know, to other media organizations and outlets, is that because there's not one answer, there's not one uniform answer or universal answer for it. And it's like, yeah, how do you not marginalize, or how do you not alienate, or your original audience, the audience that may have kind of helped you bring you up to that point? And the only response I would have to that, and I think even as individuals, actually, I'll be honest, like even as someone who really used social media in particular to kind of push forward my career as a writer, I think it's important that you have that. If you're in an organization, that has to be a sit-down type of meeting, and not just one meeting, but a series of meetings talking about, you know, what's your vision, what's your direction, what sort of topics are you interested in covering, who are the people that you want to talk to. I mean, to answer that one question, how do we not marginalize our audience, our Muslim audience in particular, in this situation, or how do we not alienate them or whatever? There are a series of other questions that you need to answer so that you're all on the same page. You understand exactly where you're from, where you're at, where you'd like to go. And once you do that, once you have this really good vision of exactly where you want to head to, answering that question as to how not to do that becomes way easier. It's not going to be easy, it's going to be easier. And I think you see sometimes it's a very public struggle, but it's something that I think every organization, independent, especially small organization, especially created by young millennials like yourself and others, everyone I think hits that point. It's like, okay, what's next?
I would say, Amani, to that is that if that was that one person, so you need to develop a relationship with your readers as well, right? So if there was that one person, and sometimes, a lot of times, it's that one squeaky wheel that, you know, that spoils everything. So why not reach out to them and explain to them the need for why exactly this needs to be addressed from a Muslim point of view, so someone else doesn't address it for them. And we've had success doing that when you reach out and you actually let them know that yes, their criticism is accepted. Even if it's not accepted, it's acknowledged, and maybe this conversation can happen offline or privately, and not for the whole world to see. So that could be, and that you retain them by treating them as important, that they are your primary audience and they are important to you.
And keep in mind that there's always going to be trolls. So no matter how much you explain and try to reach out to people and try to explain to them what your perspective is, there's always going to be people who just, whatever you say, whatever you do, they just will not agree, and they're going to try to make your life miserable. So when you're trying to do this outreach, like, don't invest so much of yourself into it that when you can't reach it, that you can't get your point across, you find yourself exhausted and frustrated as well. Like, make that initial contact, but then like kind of realize that you can only get so far with certain people.
And Amani, like, I have to say, like, to you and to also others who've ever been in this type of situation, when you get a comment like that, I know that it especially stings when it's coming from someone from your community, the community you're trying to work for, help, you're a part of. There's a special kind of sting that, I mean, like, you can get trolls all the time or people sending you nasty messages or whatever, but when it's someone who says, something like that, there's always a bit of an extra sting. You're like, oh, but I was trying to help us. But more power to you, and more power to, I think, everyone else here as well, is that, as they say, well-behaved women never made history, so.
And there's some topics that our communities are just not going to be comfortable talking about. Yeah. So just realize that, when you're framing a conversation around a certain issue, you may or may not gain support, but that doesn't mean that that issue doesn't need to be addressed. It just means that you have to be able to withstand the criticism and keep on persevering, inshallah. So
yeah, exactly. And also when you do receive criticism, if don't conflate also all the criticism into just trolling or into whatever. I think that's so important for any kind of independent outlet as well, and individual writers, is that when you're receiving criticism, and I know this because I know if I get any criticism, I'm like, oh my gosh, my life is over. But if you see amidst all that kind of terrible criticism that there is someone who's at least offering some constructive criticism or making a point that's worth considering, consider it as well. I think, and that only benefits you as a writer. It only benefits you as an organization. And so yeah, just consider. Do not conflate like all criticism. This is a general comment, but all criticism as one and the same.
So when it comes to those conversations that we're having in the Muslim community, it's really interesting. Hina, Muslim Matters and Muslim Girl recently had their own debate between our writers. Muslim Matters published an article that went viral within our community. It was about sexual harassment, and it was from a Muslim man's perspective. And there were a lot of things that were written in it that were very controversial. Like, one line that I remember standing out to me was that the author said something along the lines of, oh, well, if these women are in these public spaces dressed the way that they are and their dress having that impact on me, then they should expect me to express that and say to them on the street the way that their dress impacts me. And then Muslim Girl published a collaborative article in response called Muslim Feminists Respond, where we had writers go line by line and respond to what that author originally said. And to her credit, Hannah told me that she was there when they decided to publish it, so things might have been different if she was there. But either way, I mean, what kind of conversations should we be giving a platform to? Like, does it ever reach a point within the Muslim community where we should, stop a certain opinion from being out there because we don't want to sponsor it and we want to say, like, look, no, we're going to draw the line right there. We're not going to, allow a Muslim media publication to put that opinion out there because that's not a good representation of us? Or, do we do that? Like, do we filter, or do we just allow a free-for-all platform where everyone just share whatever opinions that they have?
I think, I'm just going to jump in there because it's very interesting to me. Because what stuck out to me is that from this entire, because I know exactly what you guys are talking about, is that the conversation that was generated by also your response to it, right? So there was a first piece that was coming from Muslim Matters, which generated a conversation. Then the Muslim Girl piece generated another conversation about the conversation, and then it was like really getting meta and whatnot. But it was, for me, like that. But that's a perfect example. It's this, and I hate to use the idea, but it's using our media sphere in the Muslim community as a as this marketplace of ideas, right? And that when it comes to certain ideas, I think you take it case by case. It's not about what views are being expressed. It's also about how they're being expressed, right? Is that just because I don't agree with something? So, for instance, I didn't agree with that Muslim Matters article, and I flinched. I was like, why? But at the same time, that still gave a space, because there are a lot of people who do think like that. That's the thing. There are a lot of people who think like that, and I don't think it's a matter of filtering. I think we have to be careful not to censor either, just because we don't agree with it. And I say this as someone who has kind of faced that too, for different issues, but is that we allow those to maybe be out there because then it also allows for responses, and then it allows for conversations, and then it allows for pushback against ideas that can be negative and detrimental to our communities as well. I don't think we should worry about how our community will be represented, how will other people outside of our community will see us, because our first and foremost concern, I believe, should be with the health of our community, with the growth of our community, and with addressing the issues that matter to us the most. So if there are people out there who think in a certain way, let them speak their mind. And I think if they've been given a platform, okay. But then the people who respond back to it should also be given a response. I think that's what should be promoted. In terms of an editorial decision as to what goes out, what doesn't, like I said, that comes down to each individual editor, organization, what have you. But I think we should promote, having different ideas, because I know, had I not, been exposed to that, I certainly would be probably thinking in one way only, as opposed to constantly considering other ideas as well. So I think that it should be. I think it's good to have sometimes even pieces that I may vehemently disagree with, but at least they're out there so that there's a reason also to push back against it as well.
I think part of it's also finding the balance between your own comfort zone and other people's comfort zones. So you want to be able to respect other people's comfort zone, and you want to make sure that you are in your own comfort zone as well. But at the same time, some of the most important conversations occur when you pull people out of those comfort zones. And I think the process of pulling people out of those comfort zones, that can be a challenge. That can be a process that might result in backlash or might create controversy, at least initially, until you can get the conversation flowing. But anytime there's an issue that causes concern or that people feel strongly about, there has to be a space for folks to be able to discuss it without being wary of backlash or without fearing that they would be targeted or victimized or harassed or what have you. And unfortunately in our communities especially, historically speaking, there hasn't been that kind of space until more recently. And even now, we see, just for example, the case in Chicago with the imam who was accused of sexually harassing young girls. This particular story, it's nothing new. I'm sure it's been happening since the beginning of time, right? But now we see our communities are finally starting to kind of feel more comfortable talking about these issues. And it's taken a long time for us to get to this place where we can, sit at a dinner party, and it might not be a dinner conversation, but we see more people who are willing to engage in this conversation. So slowly we're getting there, but I think it's a matter of just balancing comfort zones.
I wanted to also say that. Go ahead, Sana.
No, go ahead, Hannah. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So one thing that I wanted to say that there is a liberal bias. So everything is sometimes looked through a very liberal lens, I hope that Muslim Matters can get. One of the things that we wanted to do is to give people who are from the more traditional or more orthodox point of view, and I hate those labels, but that's what they are, that they also have a space, because HuffPo religion isn't going to they're not going to post the stuff that a lot of times, the opinions we hold, and yes, some of those opinions might bother people, right? But are they less valid than someone who's looking at everything through a liberal lens? And should we censor ourselves just because of, or even like our dirty laundry. Like, so just because someone else might pick it up and say, oh, look at these Muslims, they have so many issues, and they have sexual abuse in their communities, and or their men look at women this way. So this is something also, it's a very important part of that discussion, because I feel like a lot of times people who are perhaps, I don't know how to label them, maybe more practicing, feel like they don't get to have their say. I'm getting a feedback.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of a delay. I think.
Go ahead, Sana.
Okay. No, I think Hannah also brings up a great point. Is that we do also have to recognize that Hannah and Zainab actually both bring up great points about comfort zones. And when I mentioned also earlier about having thick skin, it's about not only having thick skin as a writer when you get criticism, it's also about having thick skin when it comes to ideas that you're not comfortable with, or with other people. It's like being, having that thick skin with knowing that there are people out there who probably vehemently disagree with you. And I think what's important is that, and I think the past year and a half especially is, and I hope this changes, is that we really do need to, what it shows is that we have a long way to go, definitely, in terms of having these conversations. Zainab's absolutely right, is that it's great that we're actually having these conversations. I mean, the fact that whenever I get together with any of my friends, a lot of times, like if there's any type, we'll discuss these issues, like, oh my God, remember that MIPSers thing, and oh my God, remember MLI, and oh my God, remember like this issue, that sheikh and this, and like we'll talk about actually the same topics that are being generated by Muslim media. Especially when there's like a conversation between Muslim media, right? So these organizations and whatnot, different perspectives, and I think that's really great. I just totally lost my train of thought.
One thing, Amani, you had started talking about this earlier, and I wanted to bring back some of that. We had not talked about just stereotypes of Muslim women and in media, and I think you did a really fabulous Huffington Post live clip on it to what Google Hangout on it. So tell us a little bit more about that, and tell us how. Let's direct the conversation that way to changing the narrative.
Yeah, I mean that's a great get, especially because we're supposed to be wrapping up this conversation soon, but we're having a really excellent dialogue right now. And I think that Zainab has to head out soon too. So that's like a huge convo to have, and I think it's one that we should definitely continue on social media. I mean, like everyone that is on this panel right now is very heavily involved online, and I encourage us to continue this conversation. When it comes to reshaping our identities, I think that's like a work in progress that all of us are still, it's an ongoing process that we're all still very involved in, and I really want to hear, the people who are on social media right now, like what their thoughts are about how we can move forward. But before we close out, I really wanted to pose 2 questions that I personally want to hear everyone respond to. And I hope that we can get to both of them. But the first one is that I want to bring up competition, because I think that that's something that especially we as women face. And even it's a double whammy because we're Muslim women, so we probably face it to an even greater extent. I think that it's probably an effect of the tokenization that we face, is that we assume that there can only be like one person that makes it from the community or something of that sort. And a lot of times, Maria, you mentioned that when you first started out in media, there were very, very few Muslim women that were doing work. And that's really saying something, because even now, there's still very, very few Muslim publications online or like Muslim media spaces. So I think that there's a lot of times we see that there's competition happening rather than collaboration. So if everyone can speak to that, I mean, what your thoughts are.
One of the things I would always tell my staff at CNN is you collaborate, you don't compete to capitalize, and so I think collaboration is important among Muslim media. among any media, really. But I think, one of the things that I've noticed as I've been sort of canvassing the landscape of Muslim media in particular is that I think everyone's going to have to, it's going to flesh itself out because the audiences will choose. And if you don't understand, if you don't know what your mission is and you don't have a goal and you don't have a voice that's authentic, you're going to be new and buzzworthy, but you will fall to the wayside. Mm-hmm. And so what needs to happen right now in the space of American Muslim media is every organization, in order to sustain themselves, has to establish an authentic voice and a very clear mission of what you're about. So if Muslim Girl is about being bold and being, high energy or whatever it is, you have to stick to that mission. I mean, it's the basic corporate philosophy, stick to your brand, know your audience. So that's the one thing I would say. I think collaboration is really good, but I also think competition is very healthy. And right now in this space, we have a lot of people talking about what's happening to them, but not a lot of people actually doing the real journalism. And what our community really needs now is actual storytelling, critical storytelling about our community. So you mentioned the sex abuse story. That story should have surfaced in our own media instead of waiting for the New York Times to tell it. And I know there was various reasons why it surfaced in the New York Times first. I understand that. But that story's been in our community for decades, and no one in our own community media has told it. And so I advocate for better journalism and less opinion on our media sites, and I think that in and of itself will lead to healthy competition, because that's what our community really needs right now, is better stories, more critical stories.
On the topic of the sexual abuse scandal, actually, I just want to take this opportunity to quickly plug our next episode of The Girls Room next month. It's going to be happening the first week of April, and we're actually going to be featuring the organization, the Heart organization, that is representing the victims of that case, and we're going to be talking about, sexual abuse within the Muslim community and bringing that front and center. So I hope that everyone can tune into that.
Great.
Also, I just want to.
Does anyone? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Maria said, is that competition is healthy, and I think it's not something definitely to shy away from, and that we do need. It's true, we do need a lot more good journalism. I think we need to set the standards and expectations for writing ability, even, and for and I'm talking about specifically when it comes to publish. I'm not talking about your own personal blogs and whatnot, but rather when it comes to publishing pieces and what we're putting out there, we need to, I think, have also a strong editorial process. We need to have, those all of that there, and exactly as Maria said, is that that way it's that it kind of takes care of, I guess you could say this, perhaps oversaturation or whatever, and kind of allows for the cultivation of a stronger journalism sphere and our own storytelling, that we're taking control of it and telling our unique stories as well.
Awesome.
I'm going to say that just collaboration is great, and this is, but just as we're all different, our audiences are different too. We can't, homogenize all Muslims. There are just all sorts of different Muslims around the world, and some people cater to American Muslims, some people cater to a global audience or a Western audience. Having said that, one other thing that I really think that we need to, along with cultivating journalists, we need to also cultivate journalists with Islamic ethics, because I find a lot of, this is an Arabic word called namima happening, which is frankly a sin. The telling of, sharing of tales without any backup, without any, going behind and actually getting people's, how would I say, not their opinion, but sharing of tales is a sin, number one. Number two is that it sows discord. So if there are some stories, do all stories need to be told if they cause fitna within the community? I cover the community, and sometimes we don't tell some stories just because of the long-term effects on the immediate community itself, in the sense that For example, there might be a board dispute, and it's going to be solved. Now, what is the point in telling that story when the long term, they're working it out on their own, right? How that story should be told, what ramifications will it have on the immediate community by having that story sensationalized, or so all of that, like Islamic ethics in journalism is extremely important. You will not learn it in journalism school. You have to develop it on your. I mean, I don't think there's a Islamic journalism course out there anywhere, and that's something all Muslim media needs to develop.
Does anyone have any response or anything they want to add to that?
I will say that Islam is journalism. I mean, I would say that. I mean, I don't know. I don't think this is a place to sort of have a conversation about what Islamic journalism is or isn't. But I think journalism itself, the basic principles of journalism, are Islamic, and I think that's one of the reasons I got into it to begin with, is that I feel like my faith supports my profession in seeking the truth. And so, I mean, I think I agree with you, Hannah. I think there are certain things that, that there's no need to sensationalize. And I'm not saying that sensationalizing is journalism. It's not. We're not trying to be, I don't think any of these Muslim media outlets need to be TMZ. But I think journalism at its core is about showing all sides of the story. And for many people, that might be considered criticizing or critical. But really, it's actually objectivity.
I think one thing that's really important is also to constantly examine our own intentions too. I think sometimes we get, caught up in, different aspects of telling a story that might overshadow, a more sincere, more holistic kind of approach. And I think ego also plays a role too. I think, and I'll be the first one to admit that, we're all human and we're all flawed, and we're all susceptible to, having our intentions be distorted. So it's really important to constantly ask ourselves, like, what is the motive of why we want to share the story, and what do we hope to gain from it, and to make sure that we're keeping our own egos in check and not allowing, successes or perceived successes from clouding our vision, and creating fitna where otherwise there wouldn't be any. And I think ultimately, if we keep in mind that, we're autonomous creatures, and we have different abilities, different talents that we bring to the table. But at the end of the day, if we, as Muslims, we believe that, everything has a purpose, and if we've been given the gift of sharing stories, or if we've been given a platform to share stories, then we have to make sure that we do it responsibly, and we constantly purify our intentions.
I think it's so key, and for me, this issue really, really hits home, because when I've written about specifically, it's not the only time, but just more recently about the Muslim Leadership Initiative, I received actually a few messages, both on social media, so publicly and also privately, and was accused of spreading fitna in the community, and just some of the conversation. It was actually quite ugly, and I think for me it's so important that when we are, that issue, I think it's so important. I agree 100% that there is a need for Islamic ethics and understanding, first of all, what Islamic ethics are, that they're diverse, and how do we define them and all that. But it's so important that if we're Muslim journalists, that we do imbibe those ethics as well, and that sense of justice and everything that comes along with it. But that same, for me, especially as both the news, as someone who is part of creating conversations about the news, but also someone who consumes the news, is that it's a responsibility of both. So when you're a news consumer or a consumer of media, when you're reading something, specifically like in Muslim media, it's also important for you to have those kind of ethics present in how you're engaging with that story, how you are spreading that story or talking about it, etc. So it's not just about the particular story and that writer or that journalist or what have you, but it's also about those who themselves will end up essentially taking that conversation into the masses or what have you as well. So I think it's important to, I don't think we should treat those who are creating the media and those who are now consuming the media as well, because that line is becoming very, very blurred with the internet. I don't think we should treat them wholly as separate, because very much so they are becoming in various ways, they overlap in various ways, and I think it's both important for both to subscribe to those values that are very much so central in our deen and very much so central in how we should be acting ourselves. Yeah.
Awesome. Those are all exceptional contributions to that topic. I'm really happy about all the responses that you've allowed us to share with you. And I kind of want to close out on another topic that I think kind of disproportionately affects Muslim women. And we kind of touched upon it when a few of you mentioned that we shouldn't tie ourselves in personally with the criticism that we face online. Women's E-News recently featured Muslim Girl Women's Month, and in one part of the interview, I mentioned how I've received like death and rape threats online for the stuff that I've been saying in public spaces. Even just now, while I was on Twitter, I noticed that Ayan Hirsi Ali actually like tweeted the comments that I made about her racist viewpoints about Islam, and a lot of people were responding to that, like saying really horrible things about me. And I think that especially for us as women of color, a lot of times those criticisms are very tied into either our Muslim background or our brown race or whatever it may be. I mean, it becomes very, very racialized and very personal. So I kind of want to hear about the self-care processes that you guys have. I mean, what do you do to take care of yourselves, and how important is it in this industry, in media, where we're putting ourselves out there on a public platform, to be able to, at the end of the day, like heal and refer back to our experiences and be like, all right, I need to take care of myself right now.
Unplug. And this is something that I need to do more of because I don't do it enough. But if you find yourself at a point where you're stressed out or you're overwhelmed, don't log into the internet. Like, don't log into social media. Don't check your email. I mean, unless if it's your work email and you have to do it. Just kind of like take a hiatus from social media for a while and, wait until you can, kind of gather yourself before you continuously allow yourself to be bombarded by these kind of tweets and posts and whatnot, because otherwise it really has an impact on us, no matter how mentally strong we might be. I've seen people who have, who are the pillars of our community, and they're constantly being attacked on different levels, and they're not able to like detach themselves, and it really, unfortunately, it affects them in a negative way. So one of my friends actually suggested setting aside time during the week where you just, limit yourself to how much you go on social media, or, take a vacation, don't take your phone with you. I need to actually do that myself, but that's one option.
The thought of that is absolutely terrifying. I'll take my phone with me. What? I think that's awesome advice. Definitely unplug. But also beyond that, it's surround yourself with a sort of support system of close people who are close to you that you can talk to. I mean, I have a group of friends who, sometimes when it gets too much, like I just need to sometimes just be like, no, hear me kind of rant for a moment and then help me. There's that, and then there's also for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of others, it's turning to God, turning to Allah, finding real sukoon in shifa, in prayer, which is very important, and that it's this idea that at the end of the day, no matter what criticisms I'm receiving or who's trolling me or who's getting like 50 notifications per minute or whatever, none of that actually matters, right? And none of that actually matters at all, and that there's ultimately a higher purpose to this all, and that God is greater than all of this, right? God is greater than all of this, and for me, like, remembering that and humbling myself, and that sometimes like kind of will bring me back down to reality and be like, take a breath, take a few breaths, then take some more breaths, and then soldier on.
And go easy on your loved ones. Sometimes when we're stressed out by other factors, like I know I'm blessed with the most patient husband in the world, and I can say that because he's just incredible. He's like a great source of support for me. And I honestly don't know how I would do this kind of work if it wasn't for his support, because there are days that I go home and I just want to pull out my hair. Like I feel super aggravated. Something might have happened. Somebody might have said something, and I feel extremely like upset or annoyed. And he has this way of just like calming me down and just getting me relaxed. And alhamdulillah, like if you have that person in your life, I mean, it doesn't have to be a significant other. It could be a mother, a friend, like Sana was saying. But just surround yourself with people who help you find like your inner peace, who help you find, you know, your center of gravity again, and not allow like the other filter and chatter to disrupt your inner peace.
I struggle with that.
Yeah, okay.
I struggle with that a lot. I do regularly take social media fasts. I find myself, I feel like I've changed in the past 5 years by being constantly on social media. It gets to you. It really does. Having I see you Haji with a rifle tweeted at you, or you know, just kill all the, you know, all the stuff that we constantly.
When I contacted you about this, the Girls Room episode, I think it was while you were in the midst of one of those breaks from social media, and you had like just gotten back from it, and you're like, oh, you know, are we funny?
Yes, no, exactly. I mean, and sometimes it will bother people because you're supposed to. This is your bread and butter or whatever, and you're supposed to be on top of things. But it's extremely important to take that social media fast and really, and yes, like Sana said, get back to the basics. Get back to you know, it's if you're thinking about what's going on your Twitter account during Salah, there's something wrong. You know, then at that point you need to just you know, be like, okay, this is not, you know, we're putting all of this before our relationship with God. Then sometimes, but. And it's honestly, when you say self-care, you know, as a mom of four, self-care comes like the last on the list, and but I have started realizing that it can't be the last, because if this gets to me, then it changes the atmosphere in the house. It affects the kids. I mean, the kids will come up and ask, Mama, was someone mean on the internet to you today again? And when I see that, and you know, like recently, like and then I can hear the little voices. They'll be like, oh, you know, is the FBI going to like be? And I'm like, what am I saying? What am I like saying while I'm tweeting that my kids know this stuff? So yeah, that really like makes it come into focus that I really need to step away, and I need to. Yeah, it's great to have these conversations in the home or on the phone while I'm interviewing people, but I have to be. And then so. Spending time with my kids makes me, that's something that it really just puts me back on track, and you know, this is what I'm doing this for, so inshallah they have a better world for them when they are old, and you know, inshallah. So definitely spending time with family, friends.
I think, I mean, everything, I'll just sort of wrap it up by saying, I think everything the ladies have said I would agree with. I think I would just challenge all of us. You know, how many of the friends you know in your real life are not on social media? And I could probably, how many of them are your really close friends? And I think that's the measure of sanity, is to make sure that you surround yourself by people who are in your profession, but more importantly, who are in the social networks that you're in, because they, for me anyway, provide a sense of sanity, but also level-headedness. And you're not part of the chatter that I'm part of every day, and give me a completely different perspective on what matters in life.
Beautiful. Okay, well, I think that we have kept all of you very busy and amazing superwomen long enough. And I just want to thank you all so sincerely for coming together tonight to have this conversation. I mean, I'm really biased, but this is definitely, in my opinion, one of the best conversations that I've had about this topic.
Well, thanks for hosting us, Lonnie. Congratulations to you.
This was
I
fabulous.
think
Thank you so much for hosting.
we stand on the shoulders of giants, and I think that's what this conversation really shows. And we could not be doing what we're doing without the incredible work and the roads that you've all paved for us along the way. So I am going to be wrapping this up, and I just want to let everyone know to remember to subscribe to Muslim Girls email newsletter for the next episode that's coming up in a week or so. And then also we're going to be publishing a blog post with highlights of everything, as much as it is overwhelming, all the incredible points that we've brought up. We're going to be highlighting all of them in a blog post soon that we'll be distributing online for everyone's reference. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I wish you the best of luck in all your respective careers.
Thank you for having us. Jazakallah khair.
Everyone.
Take care. Assalamu